Every story we tell is a journey, a thrilling adventure that will keep you hooked from start to finish. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing our community come together from all around the world. And don't forget, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Tomorrow, we have a special story just for you. Trust us, you won't want to miss it. See you on the next adventure. She sold paintings to save her life. Until a royal guard did this. The morning sun cast long shadows over the courtyard of Buckingham Palace, its golden rays reflecting off the towering gates and the red uniforms of the royal guards. Among the bustling tourists capturing photos and admiring the historic sight, a young girl quietly arranged her paintings against the palace wall. Emma Carter, a 13-year-old from Chicago, carefully adjusted each frame with her small, delicate hands that had spent more time holding paintbrushes than playground swings. She wore a light blue sundress, slightly loose on her thin frame, and a bright yellow scarf wrapped around her head, a stark contrast to her pale skin. Though she had long grown used to the whispers, the looks of pity, and the cautious glances, she refused to let them define her. Instead, she focused on her work, watercolor paintings of London's landmarks, each stroke capturing the beauty she saw in a city that was still new to her. A woman in a wide-brimmed hat stopped momentarily, tilting her sunglasses to get a better look. "These are beautiful," she murmured to her husband, who nodded but made no move to buy one. Instead, they walked away, leaving Emma standing there, her hands clasped together, waiting. "Mommy, why is that girl selling paintings?" a little boy's voice rang out. His mother hushed him quickly, whispering something about being polite before steering him away. Emma heard it all. She always did. She took a deep breath and straightened a price tag that had slipped from one of the frames. The numbers were modest, far less than what each painting was worth in time and effort, but she had learned to be practical. Every dollar counted toward the ever-growing medical bills waiting back home. Across the courtyard, Sergeant Daniel Brooks, a 35-year-old royal guard, stood at his post, his gaze fixed straight ahead as protocol demanded. But his military training had sharpened his instincts. Without turning his head, he had already taken note of Emma, her small yet determined stance, the tired yet unwavering focus in her blue eyes. He had seen resilience before, in fellow soldiers on the battlefield, but never in someone so young. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she reached for a bottle of water, the summer heat pressing down on her. Still, she remained where she was, standing firm, hoping that someone, anyone, would stop and see more than just a sick child selling paintings. The warm summer air carried the chatter of tourists through Buckingham Palace's courtyard. Emma Carter stood firm by her paintings, her fingers tightening around the edge of one canvas as another group of people passed without stopping. Some glanced her way, their expressions flickering between curiosity and discomfort before looking elsewhere. Others barely noticed her at all. She had learned to ignore it. The whispered comments. The hesitant stares. The occasional look of pity. But today, they weighed heavier than usual. Maybe it was the heat, or maybe it was the exhaustion creeping in faster than she had expected. Either way, she clenched her jaw and focused on her goal. She had sold only 2 paintings so far. She needed at least 5 more. Sergeant Daniel Brooks, still standing at his post, had been watching her out of the corner of his eye. The discipline of the Royal Guard meant never breaking position, never reacting to distractions. But today, something felt different. This wasn't just another street artist trying to make a quick sale. This was a child fighting for something bigger than a tourist's pocket change. A group of well-dressed teenagers strolled past, laughing among themselves. One of them, a boy in a designer jacket, smirked as he nudged his friend. "Kind of sad, isn't it?" he muttered, loud enough for Emma to hear. "Selling paintings outside a palace like it's some street fair." His friends chuckled, and Emma stiffened. Her fingers curled around the corner of a watercolor depicting the Thames at sunset. She fought the sting in her eyes, willing herself not to react. But before she could turn away, a new voice cut through the crowd. "Excuse me," a woman with two small children stepped forward, deliberately placing herself between Emma and the teenagers. "Can you tell me about this painting?" Emma blinked, taken off guard. The woman pointed to a piece showing Buckingham Palace framed by cherry blossoms. "My daughter loves art," she added, smiling down at her little girl. "We'd love to know how you painted this." Emma swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. "I started with a light wash of color for the sky," she explained, her fingers brushing over the canvas. "Then I used a dry brush technique for the blossoms, so they'd look soft, almost like they're floating." The woman nodded, impressed. "We'll take it." Emma's breath hitched. "Really?" "Of course." The mother handed her the money, and her daughter beamed up at Emma. "It's beautiful." As the family walked away, Emma stood a little taller. She glanced toward the palace gates, wondering if the guard had seen what just happened. He had. And though his face remained unreadable beneath his tall black bearskin hat, something about his stance had shifted. For the first time in years, Sergeant Brooks felt the urge to move, to break the rigid protocol he had followed for so long. But not yet. Not yet. The midday sun pressed heavy on Buckingham Palace's courtyard, casting sharp shadows across the stone pavement. Emma Carter adjusted the strap of her bag, trying to ignore the aching in her arms. She had been standing for hours, her energy fading faster than she wanted to admit. But she couldn't stop now, not when she was so close to her goal. 5 more paintings. That was all she needed to sell to make this month's payment toward her treatment. But with each passing hour, the crowds grew thicker, yet fewer people stopped. Sergeant Daniel Brooks remained at his post, his gaze locked forward, but his senses were trained on her. He had seen determination before, on the battlefield, in the eyes of fellow soldiers pushing through exhaustion. But this was something different. This was a child fighting a war no one else could see. A businessman in a crisp suit slowed as he passed Emma's display. His hand moved toward his wallet, his gaze lingering on one of her paintings. But then his phone rang, and just like that, he was gone, answering the call and disappearing into the crowd. Emma exhaled sharply. She was used to people hesitating, used to them walking away. But today, every rejection felt heavier. Her fingers trembled as she rearranged her remaining pieces, willing her body to keep going. Then came the voice she dreaded most. "Guess the pity act isn't working today, huh?" Emma froze. The same teenage boy from earlier had returned, now flanked by his friends. He leaned against the palace railing, smirking. "I mean, come on, who's actually buying this stuff? People feel bad, sure, but no one wants to stare at a sob story hanging on their wall." A ripple of laughter followed, quiet but sharp. Emma's face burned. She gripped the edge of the nearest painting, fighting the lump in her throat. She refused to cry. "Not here. Not now." Across the courtyard, Sergeant Brooks's jaw tightened. His fingers flexed slightly against his rifle. He knew this kind of cruelty. He'd seen it before, cowards who preyed on the vulnerable, mistaking kindness for weakness. Emma swallowed hard. "I paint because I love it," she said, her voice even despite the shaking in her hands. "Not for sympathy." The boy scoffed. "Sure. Whatever helps you sleep at night." Emma turned away, pretending to adjust her paintings, pretending their words didn't cut deep. But Brooks could see the truth. He saw it in the way her shoulders hunched just slightly, in the way she pressed her lips together as if holding something back. Enough. The rigid discipline of the royal guard dictated that he remain motionless, that he remain silent. But Sergeant Brooks had followed orders his entire life, and for the first time in years, he was about to break them. Because some battles weren't fought on the battlefield. Some wars required a different kind of courage. And this was one of them. Emma swallowed back the sting of their words, her fingers tightening around the edges of her canvas. The teenage boy and his friends snickered as they turned away, their laughter blending into the hum of the midday crowd. She refused to let them see her break. "Not here. Not now." Sergeant Daniel Brooks remained motionless at his post, but his grip on his ceremonial rifle had tightened ever so slightly. His training demanded stillness, silence, unwavering discipline. But inside, a different battle waged. He had seen people broken down before, soldiers pushed to their limits, comrades crushed by forces beyond their control. And he had seen resilience, too. The kind of quiet strength Emma had just shown in the face of cruelty. He had spent years defending his country, standing against threats with unwavering discipline. But in this moment, standing guard outside Buckingham Palace, Brooks realized that some battles weren't fought on the battlefield. Some were waged in the smallest moments, in words unsaid, in actions not taken. The boy's laughter still lingered in the air when Brooks did something no one expected. With precise, deliberate movement, he stepped forward. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Tourists lowered their phones, murmurs spread like wildfire. A Queen's Guard never moved. Not unless it was an emergency. But this was an emergency. Emma's breath hitched as Brooks closed the distance between them. His polished boots clicked against the pavement, every step measured, controlled. When he stopped in front of her, his towering presence cast a long shadow over her small display. For a moment, no one spoke. The air was thick with anticipation. Emma stared up at him, wide-eyed, frozen. She had seen the guards before, standing like statues, unmoving, unreachable. And yet, here he was, breaking the rules, for her. Brooks studied the paintings in silence. Then, with slow, deliberate motion, he reached into his pocket. The crisp sound of paper unfolding filled the stillness. A bill. A large one. "I'll take this one," he said, his voice steady, authoritative. He pointed to a watercolor of the palace at sunrise, the soft hues of dawn captured in delicate brushstrokes. Emma blinked. "But, you don't have to." "I know." His eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw something behind the rigid posture, something real. "But I want to." Silence. Then, like a spark catching flame, the moment spread. A woman in the crowd stepped forward. "I'd like one too." Then another. And another. The same teenagers who had mocked her now stood awkwardly at the back of the growing crowd, watching in stunned silence as people rushed forward, hands reaching for paintings, wallets opening. Within minutes, her display was nearly empty. Emma pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. She had dreamed of selling enough to make her payment. She had never imagined this. And at the center of it all, standing as steady as ever, was the guard who had chosen to break the rules for something bigger than tradition. For something worth protecting. Emma's hands trembled as she packed away the last of her supplies. Her heart was still racing, her mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened. In the span of a few minutes, her entire reality had shifted. People had stepped forward, not with pity, but with admiration. The cruel whispers from earlier had been drowned out by voices of encouragement. And it had all started with him, the royal guard who had done the unthinkable. Sergeant Daniel Brooks stood as still as ever, his rifle in hand, his face unreadable beneath the towering bearskin hat. But Emma knew now, he was more than just a symbol of discipline. He was a man who had chosen to see her when so many others had looked away. As the last few tourists trickled away, Emma clutched the thick envelope of cash to her chest. More than enough. Not just for this month's payment, but for supplies, for hospital bills, for time, something she had been running out of. She turned back toward Brooks, her throat tightening. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. For a long moment, he didn't respond. Then, just as she started to think he wouldn't, he finally spoke. "Keep painting." Emma's breath caught. It wasn't a request. It was a command, spoken with the same authority as a battlefield order. A small smile broke across her face. "Yes, sir." She turned to leave, but before she could take a step, another voice cut through the air. "Hold on." Sergeant Brooks' voice was firm, carrying across the courtyard like a drumbeat. The crowd, the whispers, the city itself seemed to pause. Then, with precision honed from years of discipline, he did something that no one had ever seen before. He moved. Not just a step, not just a glance. He saluted. A crisp, unwavering salute. Not to a ranking officer. Not to a fellow soldier. To her. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Phones shot back up. People murmured in disbelief. A Queen's Guard did not acknowledge civilians, let alone break protocol. And yet, here he was, offering the highest sign of respect a soldier could give. Emma's eyes burned with tears, but she forced herself to stand tall. Slowly, she raised her hand and returned the salute. For a moment, time stood still. Then, with a final nod, Brooks turned sharply on his heel and marched back to his post. The crowd parted as he moved, watching in stunned silence as he resumed his position as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. And no one would ever forget it. We want to hear from you. What would you have done if you witnessed this incredible moment at Buckingham Palace? Do you think the Guard made the right choice by breaking protocol to support Emma? Have you ever experienced or seen an act of kindness that completely changed someone's life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters, and we'd love to discuss this powerful story with you. And if this moment touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another inspiring story.